I'll come to you first. How has this week been treating you?
Yeah, it's jolly good, very entertaining. In fact, there's fun to be had all over the place in Scottish football at the moment. In every corner, even the dark ones that you look, there's little bits of joy to be had. Even quite enjoyed watching a team win a semi-final yesterday that didn't really want to win because they know what's coming. So anyway, Schadenfreude to one side. No, it's all good. It's all good.
Yeah, some of them were almost as disappointed looking as Andy Halliday at one point, but yeah, I've made my thoughts clear on that one, so we'll not get into any more trouble about that one. James, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm happy to see that you're up to shenanigans instead of me for a change. But yeah, no, it was good. Enjoyed the weekend of many good sporting events across. The delight of being an American sports fan as well as a football fan as you get into a Saturday and Sunday like this weekend, and it's just a veritable orgy from like yesterday. It was 6:30 a.m. I got up and watched Napoli and Atalanta, and then
that would be good.
And then my fat, lazy ass dozed off last night watching this, just because it was on, NFL game. Woke up when the players were walking off the field at 11:30 p.m. So how's that for a session?
Good effort.
Not bad. So you didn't tune into the New York Marathon and watch people putting you to shame by putting themselves through that torture?
No. Never ever considered doing something like that.
Sounds sensible to me. Alan, I'll come to you first. Not quite the tight contest on Saturday. Celtic obviously handily beat Aberdeen 6-0 in the semi-final of the League Cup to reach the final. There were some concerns among the Celtic support that having drawn 2 each at Celtic Park only a matter of weeks before, that we potentially would have a slightly closer contest, but it wasn't to be. What was your overall thoughts on the game?
Yeah, I think I don't know whether Brendan Rodgers had got annoyed by the 2-2 game, but he absolutely put his tactical brain on for this one, and I think the way that he set the team up. I was actually quite surprised. So at half time, Charlie Mulgrew was on Premier Sports saying, "Oh, they've not even played that well," and I'm like, no wonder they didn't hire you, Charlie. You've not got a clue what you're talking about. And at the end of the game, Rodgers came out and said, "Oh yeah, in the first half we were too slow and I wasn't happy." And I thought, okay, that's me put in my place. But I'm gonna die on this hill because I thought Celtic got it absolutely spot on, and the reason I say that is that they basically nullified Aberdeen to such almost a complete extent. I mean, they had 0.07 post shot XG. The XG differential in this game again was above 3, as it had been at Celtic Park. So I think, first of all, quickly cover Aberdeen then. So, I asked the question of Gavin when he was on, is Jimmy Thelin, is he an optimist or a pessimist? Well, I think we know the answer now. He's looked at that 2-2 draw, thought, yes, we can get at these. And he's absolutely doubled down. He played his very attacking formation, and he thought that because he'd got on the right side of the variance at Celtic Park, that inevitably things would go well for him at Hampden, and it absolutely didn't. And what Rodgers did was he essentially set up the team to be basically to limit Aberdeen to any opportunity to sort of get at Celtic in transition. And actually what it led to was what looked like an awful lot of quite sterile football, because the ball just got passed around the back. And in fact, if you look at the raw numbers, some incredible numbers from this game in terms of just the boring, if you like, what people think that, passing stats are boring, but they're very instructive, as all data is if it's used in the right context. Trusty 148 completed passes, Carter Vickers 95 and Scales 56. So that's another 140 between the two centre backs that played parts of games. Alistair Johnston 101, Schmeichel his season high 51 completed passes, McGregor 82, Taylor 37, Valle 37. So another 70 odd from the left full-back. So that all sounds very dull, and, you don't win football matches by passing the ball amongst the back four, you may think. But this is one of the games where you did. So what Celtic were doing essentially was basically, now you talk about teams out of possession setting traps for the opposition. What that usually means is trying to force them, for example, onto the touchline and then hitting them with a pre-organised press. This was the opposite of that. This was setting traps for Aberdeen with the ball. So Celtic were just patient to an almost fault, letting Hatate and Engels, I thought, had a really big impact on this game off the ball, because they were constant motion. Off the ball, they were rotating, they were moving, and they were moving Nilsson and Shinnie, who were both well into the mid-30s, and were man-to-man marking them, just moving them around the pitch. And then when they got their moment, Celtic, they would knock the ball forward, and they would try and hit Aberdeen. And they did it to devastating effect on the break on a number of occasions. So I think it was James will probably use some sort of boxing rope-a-dope analogy, I'm sure, but it was kind of like that. Rodgers set the team up to give Aberdeen no opportunity to quickly transition the ball. Now, it wasn't perfect. I think we did have a high number of turnovers, and we did lose the ball quite a high number of times in our own third, but not to any great impact as far as Aberdeen was concerned. And then, I think you could see them getting frustrated, and as the half wore on, and the possession was so overwhelming, and they were doing this midfield man-to-man marking, they were getting tired, and all that. So I just thought it was a tactical masterclass with the ball, and it's how to almost defend the opposition's strength with the ball. I thought it was an absolutely brilliant example of that. And I think that was the cornerstone for it. And then, Celtic's front three, I was just looking at that today in terms of just the output from them. So you've got Kuhn has got 18 goal contributions. That's goals plus assists. Maida's got 12. Kyogo's got 11. That's 41 goal contributions from the front three, and we're only at the beginning of November. That's pretty impressive, right? And that front three, when they're unleashed against a team that wants to try and press you high, wants to transition on you and get men into the box, and you end up with lots of one-on-one situations, they're absolutely lethal against the opposition of that level. So Jimmy Thelin will have learned an awful lot. It'll be fascinating to see how optimistic he is the next time he plays Celtic, because not only was he outthought, Celtic have simply got better players. That's not being arrogant or big-headed, it's a simple fact. And so, the result of that, it wasn't just a crushing. If you look at the data from this game and the data from Celtic Park, the 2-2 draw, it's the sort of data that gets generated when Celtic are at home to Ross County and they are rubbish, right? It was overwhelming, and 6-0 was not a surprise. If you looked at the data and reverse engineered the result, 6-0 would not be a surprise based on that underlying data. So hat tip to Rodgers, gave him pelters for Dortmund. But that was brilliant, I thought, and I thought they played a great game, Celtic, tactically.
Yeah, we kind of, it was as if Maeda turned into Prime Adeyemi and Engels turned into Prime Brandt or something like that. Anyway, it was nice to be on that end of it. James, a couple of players who stood out, and one in particular who Alan named there, two of them being Engels and Kuhn. But Kuhn with the 18 goal contributions, proof, is it not, that you write off a player too early at your own peril? I think if you'd asked a lot of Celtic fans towards the end of last season, would Kuhn have the season he's now having, the answer would have almost resoundingly been no.
100%. And not only, the early stages, but when there's an actual legitimate explanation for someone not performing up to what you would hope, as there was in his case. But to echo Alan's points a little bit, this was a systemic failure from Aberdeen, comparable to our systemic failure in Dortmund, meaning that, when a manager basically hangs his players out to dry, which is what Thelin did. Just commonsensically, their first midweek game of the season, at home in that emotional pressure cooker against, again, relative to domestic competition, one of the tougher teams that they're going to face. They come away with a brilliant result, and a few days later, he's got them high pressing with these two old, relatively slow, and I don't, Shinny's not like slow, but the other guy is, thinking that they're going to man mark our midfield in the context of high pressing with two center backs that aren't all that quick. And quite frankly, their fullbacks aren't that quick either. So playing a high line, all this space in midfield, trying to man mark with that rest, I mean, that is moronic. I mean, that if you would have told me that was the game plan coming in, I would have said there's no way he's going to do that. Like, it's just like I couldn't believe Rodgers set up the way he did in Dortmund. Now let me caveat all this. It's always possible that in a big game, players just lose their heads completely and aren't following instructions. It didn't look that to me in either instance, right? But you have to throw that in there. It's always a possibility. We're not in a position to know for sure.
But so just to jump in there, James, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but do you think Thelin maybe overestimated the ability of his players, or underestimated the gap in ability between his players and Celtic's players?
Yeah, I think it's only natural, just like a lot of our support and maybe Rodgers got up over their skis heading into that Dortmund game. There's been a ecosystem of hype around Aberdeen that has crescendoed leading into this game that topped off with that objectively great performance and result that we talked about with Gavin on Thursday, coming out of the Rangers game. So he would be inhuman not to have been impacted by that. This goes back to the anchoring of analytics and good decision making is because we are human and we are, as I joke, dumb apes ultimately, and so you get worked up with emotions and you lose your head. I mean, so I think that's how I would characterize it. Like, I don't know. I mean, obviously I don't know the guy, but it sure, Alan characterized it as optimistic. I mean, I think he's being charitable. Like, this was way beyond anything I think that's reasonable as a way to set up. Now, he's still a young manager. Like I said, I think it's a reasonable human thing. Rodgers went through a reclamation because he didn't do that again, right? So, you make mistakes. People aren't perfect. What does he do next? Does he learn from it? Does he move on? You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. Like if I'm an Aberdeen supporter, I'm not slaughtering him over this, like he's irredeemable or something ridiculous. But in this specific game, in this context, I thought the way they set up and the way they played was insane. Just like I thought it was for us in Dortmund. Like there's a lot of and if you look at it, like we slaughtered them in this game worse than what Dortmund did to us. It's just, Dortmund's finishing was even more nutty good than ours was in this game. So yeah, it was just, but this is also an easy part. We talk about this when you get these kind of systemic failures of one of the two teams in a game, then, all of the players on our side, when it breaks in our direction, they all look like geniuses because, it's kind of easy when someone else screws up that bad. So, Hatate and Engels had a run of Hatate was orchestrating because a lot of times there was no one within 10 yards of him because the guy couldn't catch him, couldn't keep up with him, as, you kind of would expect. So yeah, to me, that was I was watching the game. I can't believe they're playing this way. Like it was amazing, enjoyable, but so amazing.
Just to clarify, you're outright saying Aberdeen did not win the midfield battle.
No,
Is that correct?
I can say that with I can declare it with 100% certainty.
Listen, as according to the social media that I've seen, it wasn't Thelin's fault. It was the budget's fault. Aberdeen lost because of budgets.
Yep.
That's why they lost.
Yeah.
Alan, I made this point in the other podcast that I was on in the build up to the game, talking about that regardless of where Aberdeen were at just now and the start that they have made, they will eventually succumb to their lack of squad size and that kind of thing. Have we seen early signs of that, given they've had 3 pretty big matches in the space of a week, and this was the last one? I know that it's great for us to heap praise on ourselves and to talk about how Aberdeen might have got it tactically wrong, but how much of this do you think was just down to fatigue on their part as well?
Well, they didn't look tired till they were 3-0 down. And to be fair to Thelin, he didn't use that as an excuse. And I think he seems like a really smart guy to me, and I'm sure he'll learn from this. I mean, I'd be really concerned. Nilsson looks like a really clever player, but I'd be really concerned with him going forward in terms of that. If in every game you're asking him to cover that amount of ground and cover that, that position where people are coming at you from all angles. So I think they'll have to do some adapting. If they get, for example, if next season, let's say, jump ahead, if they do hopefully get into the European group stage, which I hope they do, and they start playing 2 games a week, he's going to have to come up with a plan B, because they can't play that way. It's all right once a week playing like that, but I don't think that style of play suits, and it clearly didn't scale to a team of Celtic's quality either. So, as James says, it's not hang the guy up to dry. Even a very experienced manager like Rodgers has made the same mistakes. It's really the response to that. How does he learn from it? That's the test for him and his players. I hope they don't get too downhearted. I mean, it's almost one of these defeats, like you say, it's so bad. You almost you probably spend 10 minutes on it on the Monday and just go, look, that was just shocking, right? Let's just get back to basics again. You almost don't need to dwell on it too much, really, from a kind of coaching and analysis perspective. I'm still be hopeful for them. I think they're in a good place. I don't think their squad's. I think their squad's reasonably deep, and I don't know that there's any reason why they wouldn't strengthen in January. I think the attacking patterns, especially that he's looking for them, and the passing and the pressing triggers, which is the really tricky thing to coach, I think they'll just get better as the season goes on. In that respect, I think their tactical play will get stronger. He's just going to have to find a way to not fall into this trap again of mixing, an over optimistic style of play, maybe at a time when his players probably not going to be able to sustain it for 90 minutes anyway. And I'm sure he'll learn. That's the test for him. That will be the test of his mettle, really, is does he learn?
And I'm sorry. I'm going to probably write a piece on this week for the Substack, because it really is a fascinating game relative to the 2-2 game, and how there were some material similarities with underlying statistics, but also vitally important differences that kind of made the difference. And I think Rodgers, so the way it looked to me watching it, and then also seeing reports in the data intra-game, was that it looked like Aberdeen kind of had the same plan heading in the game, and early it was very comparable. Like I don't think that their initial plan was to go crazy high press, but I think we did suck them out. Like I think Rodgers' tactic drew them into that. And that's what Alan was talking about. I mean, so it was brilliant in that regard. I mean, Rodgers' tactics created that space, and all the reasons that I referenced earlier about the potential fatigue, age profiles, inherent lack of pace that they have in midfield and in defense, like that was brilliant to do. And then, it was like shooting fish in a barrel. I mean, when you get, it was almost, in some ways, obviously different relative competitive levels, but the summer friendlies that we had, where we've talked about this season, where we were kind of in possession in our own third and half, and then hitting Chelsea and hitting Man City in behind with Maeda and Kuhn, like that's what we were able to replicate on a much different scale, and much slower and less talented opposition. Which makes it even easier for a Maeda and a Kyogo and a Kuhn to get in behind. So that's why, some of the sequences of play that they had was just incredible, because it was kind of easy. Like to me, that's to Rodgers' credit. in the tactical chess match and putting his players in a position to be able to do those things. And then, you know, credit to the players. They finished well. You know, they were ruthlessly effective in executing it. But yeah, so I just want to circle back to, I don't think this was necessarily like the game plan that Thelin had purely going in, but intra-game, just like it may not have been to the extent it was with Rodgers going into Dortmund. Like these things do evolve intra-game. So I suspect Thelin got sucked into playing into Rodgers' hands. That kind of is how it looked to me.
Sorry, interrupting. Sorry, Laura, again to interrupt again. I just wanted to address one point that Gavin raised when he was on, which was their fullbacks are really important, and they're important to supplement the attack because they tend to defend with a box four. The two holding midfielders, the two centre backs, don't tend to get that much forward. Although Shinnie does break forward now and again. So the fullbacks have got license to get forward. So we talked about pack passing against Celtic. It was even worse this game. Between the two fullbacks, they completed one pack pass the whole game. That's one. So you've nullified them as a creative force going forward, which again, you know, Kuhn and Maeda were pushing them so far back that, you know, that they had very little chance to affect the attack.
Yeah, and Alan, just to close out on the Aberdeen chat, we've sort of danced around it with some of the chat that we've had. As far as Aberdeen are concerned, does this have a material impact on the rest of their season? It had the feel of a defeat that could potentially derail a lot of the momentum that they have built. Is that maybe overstating it, or do you think there's a potential that they could fall away now?
We'll see. I mean, you know, because this group of players haven't been in this position before, you know, they've got a healthy cushion in ninth place. I'm sure they will have a wobble at some point because they've kind of, by the data, been living a little bit on the edge, as we talked about, where a lot of their games are very close, not just close in terms of actual goals, but in, you know, underlying XG performance as well. So, you know, you're going to fall the wrong side of variance on that one, you know, a few times. But I think the fundamentals are there. I think the system is strong. The way that they're trying to play is strong, but physically demanding. And I think the group of players they've got is a good group of players. So I don't think they will fall away. I think they should, after one cycle of games against, I think they've pretty much played everybody in the league more or less, they'll see that actually, yeah, we've got the measure of all the other teams, but probably Celtic just that little bit, or probably quite a bit away ahead of them. But that shouldn't be a shock. I mean, you know, just look at the budgets.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. And like I said, I was asked on Twitter, or Jim Spence, for those who know, was asking if you could pick one player from your greatest rivals team over the years to play for Celtic, or for your team, who would it be? And I said, of course, it would be Ian Jess. So, yeah, that would be my answer.
Brilliant.
I wouldn't be going for anybody else of any other club or any other persuasion, that's for sure. But let's get on to chatting a little bit about Champions League football. James, seems like a little while since we've played Champions League football, but you know, I think the momentum and the kind of some of the perception of how we've done in the Champions League has been so coloured by that Dortmund performance that it kind of overshadows what I think is in some ways a slightly more positive position that we find ourselves in than we might otherwise have. I mean, to say that we've got a point away at Atalanta, who are by no means a pushover team, is something that I think we can be proud of. And we've got games coming up against teams like Dinamo Zagreb and Young Boys that I think we would want to at least be getting draws, if not wins, against. So, I mean, before we talk about Leipzig specifically, where do you see us going in the rest of the Champions League games and how it's going to map out for us?
So I'm actually pretty optimistic on the outlook for the Champions League campaign. I guess with one caveat is that, as I've hinted at and I've said a couple of times, I think there are somewhat important aspects of how we play and kind of the not ideal optimization on style of play fit with the talent that we have that could leave us vulnerable. So if Club Blue Rouge comes in, for example, and has a great tactical plan, I think we could be, have some trouble with teams of their quality. Could be the same thing. So I think we're going to be close enough with the remaining games after this one, excluding Aston Villa, where I think the tactical matchup will really matter. I mean, who wins that matchup between the relative coaches will be important. But I'm actually, I've been talking about central tendencies heading into these games. So I think that, because I looked a little closer at Leipzig over the weekend, and I checked in with my friend Sean, who's my Bundesliga, particularly RB Red Bull fanatic, who really follows them and the whole Red Bull structure closely. And I was chastened to hear that he kind of echoed some of the stuff that I picked up at looking at them over the weekend, which is they're really overperforming this season so far on certain things, particularly in goal suppression. So I looked at basically, they've got, I forget how many clean sheets, but in the clean sheets that they have, it's like 5 or 6. So like it's a material number of their games that they haven't given up any goals. The aggregate XG that they've conceded is over 7. And now this is going off Y Scouts. So I don't put a lot of value in their post-shot XG model, but it's around 5. So, and they have a good goalkeeper. So there's some mix between they have a good goalkeeper, he's pretty good shot stopper, and opposition probably haven't been finishing great. So they're kind of been in the 6-7 range of the Bundesliga when you look at like expected points and non-penalty XG differential and that kind of stuff. So the reason why I get into that is, again, I don't think they're performing at a level that gives me like horror show that we're walking into is anything near a Bayern Munich or, that top tier, an actual pot 1 super team type of situation. I think, they're probably on a talent basis and a resource basis a notch above Atalanta, but their style of play is different in how they go about it. And I think it actually probably creates bigger problems for us, depending on how things play out, because they're more narrow and more counter-pressing focused. It's the Red Bull situation. So my concern would be if they set up to not really care if they have possession all that much and do almost the exact opposite of what we just watched Saturday. If they draw us into them, which could happen with us playing at home. Again, I could see Rodgers being a little more front-footed playing at home on a relative basis. That wouldn't be crazy. That's our ethos. And then they hit us on the counter. That they've got the quality, the athletes, and the talent to create some issues there. But they're not like their back four. I think we can, if we do the opposite, like I think we can hit them on the break. So if they're able to, or if it ends up more so them front-footed with possession for long stretches in our half, then I think that would suit us more. So it's almost like a battle of which team's willing to let the other team have more of the ball so that they can counter them type of thing. It's one of those games where I almost don't want the ball. So how that matchup plays out, I think that's the underpinning of how this game could go. But I think there's plenty of ways that we can hurt them, and but they do have 2 really good forwards, and like I'm not going into this Pollyannish. Like they still have probably somewhere around twice our wage bill. They're very good, like big, strong athletes. They're young, like their average age profile's one of the youngest in the Bundesliga. It's younger than ours, so but it's not similar to Atalanta. I'm not going into dreading the game. Like I see viable paths for us to do well and get a result. I don't think that's the likely case, but I think it's a greater probability than, oh my God, it's the second team in the Bundesliga type of thing. That if you kind of just look at it at the headlines, could be horrifying. But that's not how I'm thinking about it going into it.
Yeah, Alan, I'll be honest, I don't know much about Leipzig other than to say that it is not the Leipzig of Nkunku and company of a few years ago. What's your impressions of them and what we can expect to face on Tuesday night?
Yeah, it's tricky because they've actually had quite a tricky team to pin down. I mean, earlier in the season, they were often getting towards 70% possession against some of the lesser teams in the Bundesliga, St. Pauli, Augsburg, Bochum, for example. But yeah, if you look at their last 5 games, they're averaging 45% possession, and they've had less than 50% possession in all those games. And that's included games against Mainz, Freiburg, and St. Pauli again, as well as tricky games against Liverpool and Dortmund. So they're a really quite difficult team to predict in that sense, in terms of how possession dominant they will attempt to be. They've also flip-flopped between 4-4-2, which seems to be their default, and then a sort of 3-4-2-1 or a 3-4-3, which they seem to have used in some of the tricky games, or they did do. They played that formation away at Leverkusen, and pulled off a 3-2 win at Leverkusen with 38% possession, and losing the XG battle 1.14 to 2.23. So didn't see the game, but that suggested a bit of a smash and grab there. So not sure what you're going to get. I watched the game against Dortmund. It was what I'd call a typical Bundesliga game. It was an absolute mess. It was just a chaotic, unstructured game of football. They didn't press particularly aggressively, I have to say. They did press, but it was a bit half-arsed. And the one thing that struck me was so the two forwards, although James says they don't put a lot of width in the game, the two forwards will go everywhere. Openda especially will go either side. He'll play as a winger. He'll go through the middle. They just wander. So and Openda's quick, tricky. Needs a lot of chances to score. Sesko is 6'5" Slovenian guy. He's like a complete forward. He's only young. He's they call him sort of mini Haaland in terms of he's just got his overall game. He's not nowhere near that level yet, but he's a very hot prospect for them. I mean, he scored a goal against Dortmund from an oblique angle where he literally toe poked, just battered it into the roof of the net from wide of the goal. It was quite a finish. So not sure what we're going to get. I mean, if you look at XG across all their games this season, they're actually only averaging 1.15 XG per game. That's across Champions League, their own cup and league games, and they're averaging 0.99 against. So that's pretty close. But they've actually, scored 26 goals and conceded 14. 14 is just over the XG you'd expect them to concede, but they're 10 goals over XG in terms of what they've scored. So again, is that just luck? Is it fortune? Is it the system being stronger, etc.? One thing that's, again, interesting about them, and this was kind of echoed by one of the analysts I was reading, is that it's almost like they struggle more in the games that really matter. They weren't great against Dortmund. In fact, they were really poor. Dortmund, it was 2-1 to Dortmund, but actually it was a far more dominant Dortmund display. Again, Galacci, the goalkeeper, saved them on 3 or 4 occasions. They've lost all 3 of the Champions League games. Now, listen, they've played Atletico Madrid, they've played Juventus, they've played Liverpool, right? So, but I'm not saying they're rubbish. They've lost each game by 1 goal, but at home to Liverpool, they were pretty much blown away. I think the XG difference was nearly 2. Juventus, they managed to lose the game, even though they were playing against 10 men for 30 minutes and were 2-1 up. And Atletico basically did an Atletico job on them. They did the absolute minimum that they needed to do to win the game, but they beat them anyway. So that I think we've all been there with that. So. Yeah, so they're a bit of a conundrum in that sense. There is a bit of sort of good news in the sense that their best defender, Lukiba, young French player, he's out. Raum is their German fullback, he's out, and Xavi Simons is out as well. So that's 3 very key players. The other thing that surprised me was they were very vulnerable to crosses into the box and corners against Dortmund. Mm-hmm. They really struggled. Now we know, Dortmund have got Guirassy, who is very good in the air, but even so, each ball into the box seemed to cause chaos for them. And the other thing that I think more sort of relevant to Celtic is that they're quite happy to leave their defenders one-on-one. with attackers in defence. They don't flood their defence. They don't pack the midfield. They'll play a 4-4-2. That 4-4-2 actually becomes a 4-2-4 as they try and press, and they're okay leaving their young athletic defenders. They've got Geertrude on the right, who's a really good player for Dutch international, etc. Urban's a very experienced Hungarian international. But as James said about Atalanta, these are really good players, right? And they're better than Celtic's players, but they're not that upper level of European player. They're good international players. They're not great players. So Celtic have got nothing to be fearful of here as such. Yes, they're playing a better team, but I think the way that I would also say that the way that Leipzig play, actually, weirdly, the Aberdeen semi-final was almost a dress rehearsal. Because if Celtic play like they did against Aberdeen, now I don't know if it will scale to playing against much better players. But if they want to press on a 4-2-4 and Celtic want to keep the ball, now bear in mind they need to win this game. They absolutely have to win this game. They're 0-3. If they lose 4, the chances of them qualifying at all for the next round of the Champions League are pretty slim. So they have to win this game. If Celtic play this rope-a-dope, keep possession, don't overcommit, don't let them transition on you, I think, and then break really fast when they get the chance. When you see that moment when Kuhn's got a bit of space or Maeda's got a bit of space and you hit them, I think the Celtic could get quite a lot of joy playing that way, and limiting them in terms of their transition opportunities, because that's what they're looking for, really, is to get at you quickly. The other thing that struck me, and I think they just had a bad day against Dortmund, and is that they were kind of relying on the two front players to do something magic with the ball. There wasn't a lot of build up. There wasn't a lot of cohesion. There wasn't a lot of a sense of they're trying to attack in certain patterns. Now, I got sucked into this trap when I watched Dortmund's game before they played us, and they were absolutely brilliant, and cohesive when they played us. So, again, under the mantra of always assume they'll be at their best, I'm sure they'll play far better than they did on Saturday when they play us. But reasons to be optimistic, and I think there's a template there that we saw on Saturday against Aberdeen, that if you played in a similar way against this team, you might actually get some success.
Yeah, even the way you said reasons to be optimistic was hesitant, but that's just years of scarred tissue from watching Celtic in the Champions League, I'm sure. James, just to close out on the Champions League chat before we head off for the evening, how do you think Celtic can approach it to try and get a successful outcome? Alan's pointed to some of the ways he thinks it could happen, but is there anything in terms of selections and personnel that you think we could do to affect the game? Because obviously we've had quite a fair bit of rotation in the last few weeks, just trying to use up as much of the squad as possible.
I think that's going to be interesting. We went into the weekend, and again, speaking with Gavin last Thursday about some of the questions being on the Celtic side as far as selection, Valle versus Taylor, what would the midfield composition be, and then prominently what center back pairing would Rodgers go for, and whether Carter Vickers would be healthy. So I think my preference, assuming everyone's fit and recovery's been good, would be to just go with the same team as we did on Saturday. Similar to Alan, relative to kind of formula, obviously a different scale and quality of opposition, but generally a little bit more compact, hitting on the counter type of setup would be ideal, as I suggested earlier. The only other, the other issue that they bring to the table, and I think it does speak to partly why they're a little, I'll call it weird. They have this kind of variability in their performance levels, and they've had these injuries, but they play a lot of young guys, like really young guys. They've had this. Leipzig have kind of meandered back and forth between the pure Red Bull model that Salzburg follows, and it has on occasion gone up to Leipzig, and then depending on the manager, they've gone away from that a little bit at times. But now they're playing 3 or 4 guys that are 19 and not, they're not late subs to give them minutes because they're trying to develop them and expose them. These are guys that are starting against Liverpool, that are 19 in midfield, that kind of thing. So, that's a big ask for someone that age to be playing twice a week, playing at Dortmund, and then going to a Champions League game. So, I think it'll be interesting to see how those kind of players hold up in that kind of a scenario going into Celtic Park. I mean, again, it's not like they're not playing at Dortmund or anything, so this is not going to be some unique situation for them. It's not like they're coming out of, a relatively small league or anything, where the environment's going to be a total shock to them. So, but I do think, that could be another aspect relative to, because one of the things I talk about is can be our deficit in physicality, and I think that will be less so in this circumstance, depending on what Rose does on his selection side, because they do have some older players in midfield, like what's his name? Campbell. He could play in midfield theoretically.
Yeah. I don't think he's a first pick so much.
Yeah, Hedera's, like 25, so he's not, he's a little older. But so I think it'll depend to a degree on that. But the other part to this, this is the reason not to be optimistic, as Alan said, is that they really need this game, right? So, I mean, I would think they will come into this with their ears pinned back from an effort, from an intensity, from a focus perspective. And, so that all other things being equal, which they obviously aren't, that would not be helpful to us if they come on with their A game, ready to rock, kind of thing. But yeah, there are these aspects that I think create this broader range of vulnerability that they have. So more hopeful, but not like stupidly so, is where I continue to be.
So James, sorry, Laura, just quickly then. So that the Celts are here interviewed a lad, Adam Khan, I think his name is, who I think he follows German football on X, and he made the point that, and this is built on what you were saying about playing young players, which is that, Leipzig are very much seen as being essentially a clearinghouse for very talented young players. You go to Leipzig, and then you get a massive move to a top six team in one of the top leagues and big money. And what he says is can be a culture there of almost a bit of a lack of sort of corporate, kind of togetherness, in that, players are not there because they want to die for the shirt and they want to win trophies with Leipzig. They're there because when we're going to get this big move kind of thing. Now that, that sounds very cynical, but that's the way that the club has been run, frankly. So it's no surprise if people literally in their own careers see it that way. So, as I say, it was just interesting on the back of this season, other than winning 3-2 at Leverkusen, which Leverkusen didn't lose a single game in Germany last season. They've kind of lost all the big games this season, and it kind of speaks to that. Is it because it's a young side? Is it because when the going gets tough, there isn't really that collective, we want to win this trophy about it? So, listen, I'm probably clutching and overreaching here, because ultimately, they are good players, and like you say, they're going to have to win, and that's why I think Celtic's maybe best bet is to actually be quite patient and let them make mistakes, let them overcommit, let's see if we can hit them on the transition. If Celtic go for their throw, I think it might be a bit messy for Celtic.
Yeah, well, if there's 1 week to overreach and to clutch at straws, it's on Champions League week, and we all know that. James, Alan, thank you very much for joining me this week. It's been an interesting chat. Hopefully the listeners and viewers are seeing this 24 hours before normal, because as always we try and get the weekly episode out before the Champions League game. Before we head off, what can the viewers and listeners expect from Huddle Breakdown for the rest of the week?
Yorkshire Whistler's out tomorrow, so that'll be looking at the Dundee game and the Aberdeen against the Rangers game, so that'll be out tomorrow. This pod will be out obviously the same day. We'll have Thursday, we'll be dissecting the Leipzig game, looking ahead to Kilmarnock as well, and James and I will probably be producing some written content over the piece, as well as the stat pack from the Leipzig game will be out as well. So that's all the things that you can see on the channel. So please recommend it to your friends. Please subscribe. It's still free at the moment as we move towards our subscription model. So get in there, get that free content while you can, and please sign up with you. All you need is an email address.
Alan, James, thank you very much for joining me this week, and we will see you all again very soon.